Okay, hello y'all. Hola comrades. Today we are going to be doing a question and answer session because I am just around the point where I'm going to reach 10,000 subscribers. This is a thrilling day, and I thank each and every one of you who have watched my videos over the years. It's been a bumpy ride for a number of reasons, but I'm glad to be here. I feel very honored by y'all's support. And so I think we should dive right into this question and answer session. Y'all asked a lot of really interesting questions, and I'm more than happy to try and provide the best answers I can. I will note that I am not doing a scripted video here. I have all your questions on a Word document, but I do not have any of my answers planned out, so this is going to be pretty spontaneous. So hopefully I don't make any really big factual mistakes. Fingers crossed. Our first question comes from Renato Oliveira, and I hope I'm not pronouncing that wrong. Renato has been a big friend of this show. He bought my book, The Philosophy of Avatar, available on Amazon if you haven't gotten it yet, and he gave it a very nice review, and I really appreciate that. Reviews are extremely important on Amazon. They really demonstrate that people are paying attention to your book. Whenever someone goes and clicks on a book to see if they want to buy it, the first thing they look at is the reviews. Thank you for everyone who bought The Philosophy of Avatar. Your support really goes a long way, and I cannot appreciate it enough. I hope you found my insights interesting and thought-provoking. But on to Renato's questions. Among the shows, Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Dragon Prince, Amphibia, The Owl House, She-Ra, etc., he asks, choose two of them that you think, number one, have the best world building, number two, have the best characters, and number three, have the best couple and relationship development. So, number one has to be Avatar: The Last Airbender. That show, and I put Korra in there too, although that's probably more controversial among y'all. Those two shows are for me in a class all of their own. In case y'all didn't know, I watch a lot of shows that are not animated shows directed at a younger audience. I've mentioned a few of these shows sometimes. I'm a big fan of Mad Men, The Americans, The Leftovers. Really great shows. Of course, like a lot of y'all, I was a big Game of Thrones fan until the show really unraveled right at the end. But my point is that I watch a lot of different shows in a lot of different contexts. So when I say that Avatar and Korra are right close to the top of all the shows I've watched ever, that's high praise. I think those two shows are masterpieces. I have been very positively influenced by them in my life. Of course, Avatar has given me this channel. It's given me a book that a lot of y'all have liked, and it's given me a lot of support as I've watched it again and again over the years. Korra too, although I've not made as many videos about that. So, those shows have done a lot to really shape who I am and what I believe, and my general philosophies and ideals about the world. They're just so poignant, so thoughtful, so haunting shows. They do offer a hope of renewal, of some sort of regeneration of the world, in spite of all the sorrow and suffering that the characters face, but they're never cheap or saccharine about it. I really love Zuko and Korra's stories. Zuko, as I'm sure a lot of y'all might know, is quite more similar to Korra than Aang is similar to Korra. They both start off on shaky philosophical footing. They have mistaken beliefs about themselves and the world, and over time they grow to overcome those beliefs. Zuko's story is your traditional redemption arc, only done very well, and I love that he makes the wrong decision at the end of Season 2. Even though all his circumstances have pushed him toward making the right one, and it's only when he actually gets everything he wants that he realizes that he's so miserable. That's a really clever twist, and that's a big reason why Zuko's story, I think, resonates so deeply as it does, and feels so honest and real, as opposed to a lot of these other so-called redemption stories, which can kind of feel cheap. Korra's story is different, and one I probably relate to a lot. She comes in with this very passionate level of idealism. She's just going to go and find a way to make the world better, whatever the cost, and then she realizes she doesn't really know anything. She's not a bad person at the start, just kind of arrogant and clumsy and awkward and not very philosophically attuned. But as she grows throughout the show, she matures. She has to really decide for herself who she's going to be spiritually, who she's going to be as a leader, and what her real philosophies about the world are. Season 2 is probably the most important season of Korra, even though a lot of people hate it, because it's a season about what you do when you realize that there is no pre-existing framework that is going to save you, that you have only your own ideals to rely on. Korra deciding to leave the portals open at the end of Season 2 maybe could have been executed better, but philosophically that is very important because it is a decision that she is making for herself. No one can tell her what decision to make. It's something she has to decide for herself, and she has to handle the implications of that, the consequences of that, both positive and negative, for the next couple seasons. They're decisions that she makes. And in Season 3, she has to defend the gains of that decision. She's not just trying to, say, just beat the bad guy anymore. She's learned that that whole frame of reference is wrong. That trying to make the world better isn't just about defeating all those evil guys who are trying to destroy everything. That might be part of it, but it also might be part of it that those people might be right about some things, and that you should try and learn from them in order to try and decide what beliefs you yourself hold. And, of course, this is why it's so perfect when Korra is there to talk to Kuvira right at the end of Season 4. This is the real culmination of her story. She's realized that this whole black and white division between herself and the antagonist is a false one. That there are just people who have ideals and who make choices, and that if one is to actually try and do something more than just defeat the evil guys and try and make the world better by one's own ideals, if one actually wants to decide what the world is going to be, one has to be more humble and actually try and learn from one's own experiences. Not in a simple or superficial way, but actually looking at the actions one has taken and the actions one's antagonists have taken, and decide what the correct path is for the world going forward. I'm sorry, that got way off track. I probably lost a lot of y'all who do not like The Legend of Korra, but it's really a show you have to sit on for a while and think about. It's more flawed than Avatar, but I think it's at least as good. So yeah, in terms of world building and characters, Avatar and Korra are clear above everything else. In relationships, not so much. For reasons I cannot pretend to know, Avatar and Korra are not the greatest at depicting romantic relationships. It's the one area of those shows that is by far the weakest, and it sticks out like a sore thumb to me. I've made a lot of videos about romantic relationships in these two shows, especially Avatar, but I do think that's one area where those shows could be better. So to actually answer the question posed to me, because I should probably do that, the two shows with the best relationship development are The Dragon Prince with Callum and Rayla and The Owl House with Luce and Amity, of the shows that I regularly make videos about. They're relationships where people actually take the time to understand each other, to build the relationship together. And it's not easy, and it's not simple, and it's not necessarily straightforward. Just really caring about someone isn't enough. That's a strong foundation, but you have to try and put work into it to try and understand the other person's perspective and build that relationship together. As for the best world building and the best characters, Avatar and Korra are definitely the best in that regard. I would probably put either Amphibia or the Dragon Prince there with them in terms of world building and characters. I think the main trio of Amphibia, Sasha, Anne, and Marcy, is a very strong central trio. It reminds me a lot of Team Avatar, not in the sense that they're always amicable and kind and mostly generous toward each other, but in the sense that they're these different people with different perspectives, and none of them are necessarily wrong. They're just all really given the nuance and ambiguity that they deserve. The show really dwells on the decisions they make without really being harshly judgmental. I think Amphibia, as good as it is, would be a significantly better show if it focused on its main trio even more. So that's a long answer for that first question. I guarantee you the other ones will not be quite as long. I will say that I am not going to get to all the questions that have been asked of me. I'm sorry about that. A lot of the questions were about similar topics, so I'm going to try and get to at least every topic presented to me, more or less, though not every individual question. Okay, question 2 from Scruffy725. He asks 2 questions. What's your favorite hobby outside of the YouTube channel? And what would you like to see happen in Season 4 of The Dragon Prince? So, my favorite hobby. Well, I guess it depends what you consider to be a hobby. I read a lot of 19th century literature. 19th and early 20th century. I'm a big fan of the modernists. Virginia Woolf, Conrad, James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, all those people. I think their writing is extremely bold and experimental, and it really is able to call on the past in a way that is not reactionary in order to kind of revivify the present and kind of offer a solution to the intellectual and spiritual and moral crises we seem to be facing. Really love that stuff. But I wouldn't call that a hobby, since that's so closely tied to my college education. I listen to a lot of classical and jazz music. I was listening to a lot of Mahler pieces the other day. Really love that late Romanticist classical music movement. Just so much bombast and electricity. It's kind of electrifying. But in terms of non-academic stuff, I mean, love to take hikes. I always walk around at least once a day. It gives me time to clear my mind. And I love to travel, which has been quite an annoying hobby to have these last couple of years since I haven't been able to do so. Well, I say that ends now, or at least whenever I get the chance. I'm tired of not traveling, and I'm gonna get back to it. You have to really go to places and expect that they will not necessarily meet your expectations. I think a lot of people come into, say, a trip to Paris or London or wherever with very idealized image of what they're going to see there, and then they're disappointed when the place they actually see doesn't meet that image, even though the actual place is much more interesting. One really has to be open to new experiences and to new conceptions of what is true and beautiful. Montaigne is very good on this in terms of really expressing a sort of humility that goes beyond the individual ego and really demonstrating the kinds of perspectives that we can gain when we try and step out and look at other people. Empathy is important, but not just in the way that it's used so often these days. Like, actual empathy, like being able to transcend one's own viewpoint, to see that the entire idea of, like, the self being entirely separate from others, and from the earth, and from nature, and from society, is a fallacy. That we're all connected to each other, not in a cheap or sentimental way, but in a deep ontological way, and the better we understand that, the more humble we become, and I think traveling really helps with that. As for the Dragon Prince, I don't know, I'd like to see Claudia get a lot more attention. She's a great character, and she's probably the person I'm by far the most interested in terms of the future of the Dragon Prince. Erebos is intriguing, but I'm not captivated by him, necessarily. He might become more interesting later once we know more about him, I don't know. But Claudia, whose spirit is so posed at this point to proceed down the path of darkness and decay, I find that fascinating because Claudia is not some evil, manipulative person. We know who Claudia is. We've seen her for seasons. When Azula broke down and just completely lost her mind, it was terrifying and very poignant, but one never felt that this was something completely alien to Azula. For Azula, it's a lot easier to go and point to her and say, oh, that would never happen to me. I'm not like that. But Claudia is not some person like Azula. She's not cold-hearted at the core of her spirit. She's just an ordinary person who nonetheless has an unfortunate tendency to prioritize her family over any abstract, grandiose Kantian senses of morality, and because of that, she makes choices that lead her down a dark path, and then she finds, once she's proceeded down that path, that there are only more dark choices for her to make. It's brutally realistic, and I hope they dig into that more as we learn more about who Claudia is as a character. Question 3, Epic Scribbles. Great name. Do you think that Luce will be able to see Amity when she goes home, travel between worlds? This, I think, is a more straightforward question. I am going to say yes. I really do not think it is likely that Luce is going to be stuck without Amity forever, or even for most of the time. That would be a very strange and dissonant ending. I would be shocked if they had Luce completely stay in her own realm by the conclusion of the Owl House and then try and act like that's a good thing. her closest relationships have always been with the people and beings of the Boiling Isles. She has very few close relationships at home outside of her relationship with her mother. In the Boiling Isles, however, she is Ida, she is King, she is Amity. It's a really enriching experience for her being there, and she has grown a lot from that. If the show took that away from her, that would be very dark, and I really do not think that they would go that route. So yes, I do think that Amity and Luce are going to be together at the end of the show. Question 4 by Caroline Di Salvatore. Again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. She has 3 questions, and she says I can answer any one of them. How about I answer all 3? Number 1, do you think Rose Quartz shouldn't have been Pink Diamond? Number 2, what do you want to see from Avatar Studios? And number 3, how do you see a believable and deserved redemption for Azula? Those are all very good questions. I'll start with the easiest one, which is Avatar Studios. I know a lot of y'all want to see the adventures of Aang and crew after they've grown up, but I'm not sure I want to. Like, I think there are 2 ways for how that could go. There is the easy way that would probably give a kind of superficial show that does not really demonstrate the best of what the show is capable of. Or number 2, there's the way I would like. That would probably be very unpopular. A show about Team Avatar just basically having the same adventures as they did when they were kids. Only they're much stronger now. I don't think that would be particularly appealing. The show has always been at its best when it's about the real struggles the human spirit faces, our real challenges to live up to our ideals and the convictions we hold about ourselves and the world around us. I don't really want a kind of light and breezy Team Avatar reunion show. I don't think that would be emotionally honest, and I do not think it would fit the versions of these characters that we get in The Legend of Korra. Korra is about, as a show, a world that has fallen, a world where all these childhood expectations of Team Avatar to completely reshape the world for the better have, if not completely failed, then at least fallen flat a little. Everything has not gone as they planned. The most obvious example of this is Toph, who ends up with 2 kids from 2 different dads, neither of which seems to be around. That is kind of painful and heartbreaking, and there's no easy way to get around that. And then there's all these other characters and their relationships. I mean, there's Zuko, who we don't get a lot of information about in terms of what happened to him in the 70 years since Avatar and before Korra, but was he particularly happy with Mai? That relationship, it does have some bright moments, but a lot of people have been skeptical about that, and I think that's reasonable too. And then there's Aang and Katara, who, wow. Aang, it's heavily implied in The Legend of Korra, was not the best father, not because he was a bad person, but just because he had his duties to the world, and he had to fulfill those duties. He had his burdens as the Avatar, and his burdens to the Air Nation. Tenzin was the only one who could carry on that legacy of his in terms of being the last airbender, which Tenzin, of course, does become after Aang dies. So of course Tenzin gets more attention, and the other two get less, and are kind of resentful because of that. Katara, it's kind of implied, is the one who has to do a lot more to raise the kids. And I don't think it's coincidental that Katara does not have a grand statue in her honor. I'm not saying she only went and raised the kids, but that was probably, realistically speaking, a big way she was spending her time, especially if Aang was not always there. And a lot of people feel that doesn't really fit the Katara we see in Avatar, and maybe it doesn't. There's a story to be told there. I guess what I'm getting at is that my version of Team Avatar grown up would be kind of depressing. And that is very much written into the canonical text of the timeline, and it's good that it's there because that's really interesting. But if people could not handle Korra, which was still mostly a relatively straightforward adventure story, if one with a lot of deeper and less cheery and simple and optimistic philosophical tones. I don't think a lot of people could handle the kind of story I would want to see of Team Avatar. I know that sounds snobbish, and I don't mean it like that. I'm just saying you have a choice, if you're going to do a story about Team Avatar, between being breezy and light and not really doing justice to these characters, or doing justice to these characters and making a lot of so-called fans very unhappy. So I think they should probably stay away from that altogether and focus more on other parts of the Avatar world. I would kind of like to see that Kyoshi story made into a show or a movie. Do I think Rose Quartz should not have been Pink Diamond? That is true. I do not. I don't mean to imply that this was not planned. It very clearly was. There were a lot of hints planted. But I think philosophically it's not the best for that show. Steven Universe I like more than a lot of people, but not as much as its biggest fans. I think when it's in the psychological and intimate and this grounded but lyrical space, it works well. When it tries to go into these more abstract, political, sociological themes, it runs into a lot of trouble. I guess the big problem I've always had with Rose Quartz being Pink Diamond is that it kind of destroys Pearl's story to me. It makes Pearl into someone who was not a rebel, who was not actually someone who had a life and then was so swept up in this rebellion that she left all that behind for Rose. It's just that she was loyal to her diamond like she always was. That's kind of dark and cynical, and I don't think the show really understood that. There are a few moments in Steven Universe where the characters talk about Rose hiding her identity, but that's more in the province of her being deceitful and not telling the truth. Like, the actual philosophical implications of this are not necessarily explored to the degree I think they could be. What doesn't mean that our Grand Rebellion leader is only one of the most powerful people in this world who just became a turncoat. What does that say about the possibility of people actually trying to improve the world and make it better? It's something that changes the story in a lot of ways I don't think the show was prepared to handle. I made a long video about it, But that video is no longer available. It was one of the ones I made back when I was in high school, and that was copyright blocked. So I'll just say that that decision is emblematic of a lot of the failings of Steven Universe in terms of prioritizing these big personal revelations over the kind of grand philosophical theme work of the show. For all Korra's problems, and there are a few, that show, if anything, had the opposite problem. Its character dynamics could be a little shaky, especially with our side team of Mako, Bolin, and Asami, but the philosophical implications of the show are very clear and very deliberate. As for the Azula question, I think it's a long journey for her if she wants what people call redemption, which, for our purposes, let's define as her basically joining our team of heroes and fighting for a better world. It would be a lot harder than it was for Zuko. Zuko has always basically been a good person. His ideas of what is right and just are, these ideas are kind of founded on a lot of false pretenses, but he always does try to do what's right. And even in the early episodes of Avatar, they make sure to demonstrate that Zuko tries to do what he believes is just. He's not wantonly cruel. That's a big contrast they make between him and Zhao right at the beginning of the show. He doesn't attack Zhao when Zhao's down, and he even prioritizes his uncle over chasing the Avatar back in episode 107, I believe. Yes, the Spirit World. So Zuko is someone who has always been trying to be a just person. He just has a very flawed idea of what that means. Azula, however, does not have that internal moral compass, at least not yet. She has a very difficult time showing empathy towards someone, and she's always kind of been a little, let's call it, challenged at being what I think we call a good person, someone who's affectionate and tender and thoughtful. But that doesn't mean she's an irrevocable monster. I really want to point that out. In The Beach especially, she demonstrates that she is capable of caring about people, and she is capable of a lot of intense self-reflection. I think that over a lot of years that she could gradually, with Zuko's help, kind of temper her worst tendencies and try to help other people and try to really become more caring and compassionate. But it would not be an easy road. Montana Eagle and other people with somewhat similar questions have asked, what is your favorite show to go over? What's your favorite topic to discuss out of everything you've covered? Well, that's hard. Like, a lot of the videos I really like are ones that do not get a lot of views. Normally, I have a good conception of what gets views, and I try to follow that, but there are times when I'm just so overcome by my desire to make a certain video that I go ahead and make it, even though it doesn't end up getting a lot of views. So let's just limit it to videos that I like, that I've made, that have been pretty popular. Of all my really old videos, like the ones I made before I started doing a lot of Avatar analyses, I am really glad my Whisper of the Heart video has been as successful as it is. It crossed over 100,000 views recently, and I was so shocked that that happened. But I really loved, speaking of all my recent videos, a lot of the ones I did right after Marcy died in Amphibia. And I was putting her death in the context of tragedy, especially Shakespearean tragedy, when I talked about why her death worked as well as it did for me. This combination of her being at fault, but at the same time not really deserving what had happened to her. Her trying to exert her ideals to achieve a goal only to see her actions leave her so isolated and alone. All of that was something I really spent a lot of time thinking about and reasoning about, and I think those videos are some of my best. And I'm glad those have at least gotten some sort of attention. Also, I love the video I did is kind of a comparison between Amphibia and Star versus the Forces of Evil. That was really just a way for me to talk a lot more about the ethics and philosophical elements of portal fantasy. That was a good video. I think I got very in-depth in talking about why exactly Amphibia is a great show in terms of actually thinking out the implications of these characters who have very different personalities and goals being in this different world. Question 7, asked by Shannon along with some other people. What are your predictions for the live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender? Well, I have to say news has been somewhat encouraging. I'm glad we've gotten the cast, and the cast looks good. I really like the actors they cast for Katara, Sokka, and Zuko. The Aang kid I don't know much about, but I'm sure he'll be fine. I don't think we need a live-action Avatar, but I'm going to watch it. I think I'm going to hopefully enjoy it. I'm really concerned that the showrunners talked about how the project was so different from their original vision that they felt it was no longer productive for them to stay there. That was really disconcerting. But if you're asking, do I think the show will be as bad as the M. Night Shyamalan movie? No, I don't think it's going to be that bad. And I don't think it's going to be as good as the original Avatar. I'm really interested to see what changes they're going to make, but I don't see what changes they will at this point. They said they're going to be pretty faithful. I am kind of concerned about the parts of Zuko and Katara, not because the actors are bad, but because those are very difficult parts, and they require a lot of emotional ambiguity and a lot of ability to demonstrate both this darkness, in Zuko's case, tempered by this desire to genuinely be a good person and to have back the stability he wants. And in Katara's case, her motherliness, her compassion, mixed with her biting wit and that strand of really deep and bitter darkness within her. These are hard characters to get right, and I really hope the actors are able to do them justice. Question 8, Caitlin Thurston. Another person who reviewed my book. Thank you, Caitlin. I really appreciate your help. Again, every review counts. She asks, since you talked about The Legend of Korra a lot in your book, are you planning to do any more videos on The Legend of Korra? Well, I've talked quite a bit about it here already. So I'll just say that I think The Legend of Korra is a masterpiece. I think a lot of people are just angry because they wanted it to be more like Avatar. I think it does have some real problems, but I think it's a much more philosophically rich show than Avatar. At least more than the Aang side of Avatar. And I really love how it's not a journey from evil to good necessarily, or even from misguided to good. It's a journey from someone who is just a teenager kind of struggling to figure out their place in the world, to maturity and thoughtfulness and a willingness to look beyond oneself and one's own ego at a lot of different ideals and perspectives and to one's own past experiences. I probably will not be making a lot of videos on Korra since it's not as popular and it's pretty controversial, but I love the show. and I think it deserves a lot more attention. Question 9. I'm going to try and go through a lot of these other ones pretty quickly. Asked by Joanna Yawn, who asks, Sasha's a Slytherin, Marcy's Ravenclaw, but what Hogwarts house do you think Anne would be? I've actually thought about this quite a bit, probably more than I would admit, and I think it's pretty obviously Gryffindor, and I don't necessarily mean that in a positive way. One thing I think Harry Potter at its best gets that I think a lot of people who look at Harry Potter and analyze it don't really get is that Gryffindor is not good and Slytherin is not evil. This sounds simple, but a lot of people miss this. Slytherin, for the record, I'm a Slytherin. Slytherins are more cynical, they're ambitious, they're very systematic. They have these plans, these schemes that they look at impartially without just trying to be over sentimental about it. But they do very much care deeply about people. They're not cold and heartless people. Sasha has both the negative and positive qualities of that. And Anne has the negative and positive qualities of Gryffindor. In the positive lane, she's very brave, she's bold, she sees herself as a defender of her friends. She's very fiery, but at the same time, she's very impulsive. She's very committed to her own perspective and unwilling to see how that perspective might be wrong, and she has a lack of capacity to engage in serious self-reflection like we've seen from Sasha and Marcy. Anne is wrong about a lot of things, and I kind of wish she would be more willing to realize that. Number 10, asked by Danny Lopez, what themes do you enjoy seeing explored in literature or media? Probably what I'm in love with the most, as both a viewer and a writer myself. This is gonna sound bad, but probably failure. People either failing in a material way, not achieving a certain goal they have, or failing in a more spiritual and psychological way, achieving their goals but not being satisfied by them, or achieving their goals but having to live with that guilt and doubt that they've betrayed their own ideals to a certain extent in order to reach that point. I think fiction is at its best and at its most useful when it's about uncertainty, when it's about doubt, that which we don't know, that which there might not be a real clear answer to, and kind of plunging into those ambiguities and those fragments of meaning that we have such a hard time arranging into this grand idea of our purpose. We're all going to fail to a certain extent. We're all going to fail to achieve our ideals to a certain extent, and it's okay to realize that and to try and learn to live with that. That doesn't mean not trying to make ourselves or the world better, but just being humble and acknowledging that all our grandiose dreams might not necessarily come to fruition the way that we think they will. And our last question, and one of my favorites, from Twaza number 1654, where did you get that amazing hat? And Renato, in a comment to that, asks, where did you get the plush? Since we talked about the Legend of Korra, this has always been my Pabu. I carry him with me everywhere. Nice little fire ferret / red panda. It's a very sweet little companion. As for my Napoleon hat, I just bought this over Amazon, so that's not a very interesting answer, but the original hats I used back in my very, very early videos with my webcam, those were hats, paper hats I actually got in Paris when I went to Napoleon's tomb, so that's a much cooler answer. So anyway, I'm so glad that y'all have been here for this question and answer session. I hope you found it at least somewhat interesting. I've been talking for a long time now, so I'm probably going to get myself a nice glass of water. But thank you all for sticking around so long. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Big announcement, I'm probably going to be making only 2 videos a week from here on instead of 3. At least until Amphibia comes back, and maybe even then. I do enjoy making these videos, but they've been quite stressful, so now that school is starting back up, I have a lot to think about in terms of how I'll spend my time going forward. I hope that doesn't bother y'all. I just need some more time for myself. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Thank y'all again. Adios, comrades.